Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, a group of friends and I have been talking about a whole bunch of stuff because I keep saying we've been talking about a whole bunch of stuff. You should know that by now because you're paying attention to my channel, aren't you? But anyhow, one of the things that the discussion has kind of come around to is learning the game. And that little blurb that they have in all role-playing games books, what is a role-playing game? Well, these are the dice. You inhabit a character, blah, 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 blah. And how of how much use is that particular section in the game. We also talked about like just learning in general. Like, I mean, what tends to happen is people ask a lot of questions, and a lot of times the questions they ask are already in the book. The most popular videos on a lot of channels, and some of the most popular channels, are where they teach you how to play a game. And the stuff that they tell you on those videos or on those channels, well, it's in the book. And so these are kind of two different subjects, and so I didn't want to make the video too long. Part of it I'm going to sound like a curmudgeon, so, forgive me. I'm going to try not to sound like a curmudgeon. But to me, of much greater interest is what's in that little blurb. And I think what's happened over time, I think we all kind of were having some agreement on this, is that, those little blurbs in the book, the various role-playing games books, they kind of borrow from each other. And some of them are written kind of poorly, some of them are written better. Some of them use a lot of buzzwords, like RPG buzzwords, like, story-driven, or cinematic, or, whatever. You get the basic idea, because we've all read them. Or maybe we haven't read them. Maybe we've skipped over them. I know that I'm guilty of skipping over a whole bunch of them because, I pick up a new game and I think to myself, well, I already know all this stuff, Unless it's got some new really bizarre dice or something, I don't want to know that. But I've been trying to be good lately and actually reading these things. And to me, it's kind of divided into a couple different things. I mean, I think overall, as role-playing game designers, as a whole, not that I've designed one, we've gotten a lot better, like light years better than we used to be. Like, if you were ever trying to make sense of the three original books for D&D, or like in my experience, like, first edition Dungeons & Dragons, I made sense of it. However, navigating your way through those books to find information you needed was a nightmare. And this meant that you had to remember page numbers and like dog-ear things. And, this is prior to Post-its. You just put little bookmarks in there. Can you believe stuff was prior to Post-its? But anyhow, Post-its were great when they came out. But we had to you kind of like you figured out where all these little tables and all this information was in the book. Now we are phenomenal at presenting this stuff. So in role-playing games. So I think on a procedural basis, like when most role-playing games, when they teach you like how to play the game in the book, I think we do a phenomenal job. Every once in a while, things are a little bit wonky. Every once in a while, I'll talk to one of my friends that has played a particular game. I'll say, this passage right here is a little bit obscure. I remember there's this one obscure passage in Leagues of Gothic Horror around the spell casting, which I was like, and fortunately, I felt better when I found out that many people had found that a little obscure. I'm like, yay for me, I'm smart. But anyhow, that's when I particularly like look for help in that from somebody else with experience. To me, and I'm going off on this little tangent for a second, all those YouTube channels or videos where they show you like how the mechanic works. To me, those are like infomercials, at least for a person like me. Like, I become interested in the game. I remember Sebastian, Null Inquisitor, was talking about for 7th Sea First Edition. He had this series of videos on that. I watched that, and he explains the mechanics. And to me, it was like, would I really want to go out and try to find this game because it's out of print? And the answer was, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. There was another game called Tech Noir, which I bought, which I enjoy. That the same thing. Like, I heard Runeslinger mention it, but then like a video popped up and it was a dice mechanic by the guy that wrote the game. I watched that. I'm like, huh, that sounds kind of interesting. I found the dice mechanic cool. So to me, that's more like an infomercial thing. Same thing with Fantasy Flight Star Wars. Like, oh, that's an interesting mechanic. It wasn't so much that like if I picked up the book, I wouldn't be able to understand it. I don't believe. It's more like, oh, that's cool. And I found things on the web that will just tell you on a page, how a lot of those mechanics work as well. So, it was just that was what popped up on my screen. So that's how I learned it. If that's how you learn stuff, I'm not knocking different learning styles. However, let's go back to what I was originally going to talk about. Procedurally, I think we do a great job in role-playing games now in terms of teaching you how to play the game. Every once in a while there's a little hiccup, but for the most part they're written in a very clear manner. And I think, curmudgeon hat on, if you take the time to actually sit down and read the book, you'll get it. I think what we do a lousy job of, for the most part in role-playing games, is explaining what this game is going to feel like. You know, like when it, you know, I believe what these little blurbs should say are things like, hey, this particular dice mechanic is going to generate success about 70 or 80% of the time. It's also going to generate threats or complications 20 or 30% of the time. And this is going to produce a cinematic feel with, you know, some constant, you know, trouble for the characters, but they're going to be able to overcome it. It's going to promote this style of gameplay. You know, just or something like, you know, say Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I got you know, privy. I watched Matt Colville video, and then you know, talked to some other people who knew some more about the development of it. The idea they went for, and I could be wrong a little bit, but this success rate of around 70% in combat, and you know, that was, you know, if you screw with that, this to me, a game should say, this is what we're looking for here. This is what this game is designed to promote, and that's why the, you know, all the what do you call those freaking things? Those combat or encounter tables, those encounter levels, whatever the heck it is. You know, you guys that play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons know. These are all carefully designed to always promote that feel. And so if you mess with that, then you're going to be fighting against this. So I believe that the games ought to have, you know, whatever game it is, an explanation for, like, you know, Powered by the Apocalypse. Same thing. Okay, well, you know, Game Master moves are only triggered by player moves. Tell me why. Tell me what feeling you're going for. You know, I want to see more of that in games. Games like Tech Noir did a great job of explaining to you, like, what the feel was supposed to be. It also did a great job telling you, don't do this. If your players create a character like this, that's not okay because they're playing it wrong. They're not going for the genre right. Circle of Hands does a great job, you know, over and over telling you, like, why you should do it in a particular way. James Raggi, in a lot of the stuff he wrote in his Game Master book, which is hopefully he prints again, and a lot of some of the modules he wrote, tells you, like, why he's doing specific things. So why you should do a thing in a particular way, what not to do. Don't force this outcome. There is no forced outcome. In Apocalypse World, Baker does the same thing. You know, he lets you know, like, why you're doing a lot of times what you're doing. And the various authors have, you know, insert more or less of a familiar tone. And sometimes I wish, you know, this is personal preference, I wish they'd back off the author voice a little bit, because it's kind of like they're in the room with you. Little intrusive sometimes. But that's a personal preference. Some people love it. But no matter what, I believe those blurbs, you know, in the books should be, you know, let's face it, most people that pick up a role-playing game, they've already played one. They already know what role-playing games are. Yes, there should be something in there telling you what a role-playing game is, but that doesn't take very much time. Then it's like, what is this role-playing game that you've got in your hand right now? What is this like? What are the mechanics designed to emulate or to produce? What is the genre that this is going for? Are you playing Legacy of Cthulhu, where the idea is you're emulating the original Lovecraft stories, where it's you running away from the cosmic horrors and eventually you will go mad, you know, or die? Or are you playing Quantum Black, where it's more August Derleth, where it's you against the mythos and you can shoot them up? You know, what genre are you trying to emulate in this book? You know, and what should you do? What shouldn't you do? Because otherwise you end up in these situations. We all bring, or most of us, you know, except the people who haven't played role-playing games, we bring baggage from other games with us. And, you know, I think a lot of times we get into trouble when we're we're fighting against the system that we're playing, and we don't even know it. And part of the reason we don't know it is because the book hasn't told us what it is we're supposed to be doing. That's what I think ought to be in those blurbs a little bit more. So I think we're halfway there. I think we're getting better at the procedural stuff. I think we expect to be, you know, this curmudgeon hat on. We're expecting a lot of times to be spoon-fed too much by people, and we ought to read the book, read the manual. But I believe the book ought to tell us more about, you know, what the intent is, you know, why we're doing what we're doing, what these mechanics produce, and you know, what you should do and shouldn't do. What do you think about all that?